the great thing for any of these coaches on staff, I think the personnel is excellent. So I think that they've, especially up front on that defensive line, think they're going to have a chance to have a really good defense heading into next season, regardless of who's named defensive coordinator. Because to me, if it's not a guy like Jim Knowles, whether it's official or not, the defensive coordinator is Brent Venables.
Yeah,
that's just the way I look at it. Interesting you mentioned John Mateer. Danny and I this morning on the show, it's way too early, and we ranked our top 12 quarterbacks heading into 2025.
Here for it.
John Mateer came number 4 on our list of all the quarterbacks in the country, and it wasn't even for me. Like, I try to, if it gets to a point where I've got to make a pick like that, I would. But Danny took John Mateer number 4 heading into next season, which I thought was great. And interestingly enough, we had Max Olson of ESPN.com on, and he had a piece out, and they were ranking the transfer portal players, and he had him as the number 1 transfer portal addition at all positions for this past portal session. And he was talking, and he said that they did a lot of interviews and reached out to a lot of people, and he was talking about they talked to some NFL people and just his efficiency. And then he was saying that they talked to some people from I think he said it was Washington State, and basically the way he framed it, and I've heard similar, and I hate to even throw this out
Go ahead.
But just as great as the on-the-field footballerism is with the running ability, the throwing ability, but the leadership and what he brings intangibly might be far greater. This is Max Olson, not me, but he said what he had heard prior to him getting to Oklahoma was that the Sooners should expect a personality similar to one Baker Mayfield. Now, I hate to throw that out there because to me there's only one Baker Mayfield. And what he brought that year, even the year that he sat out, like anyone around the program knew like this guy was he was wired different. But I think he said it was Eric Morris that he had talked to, who's the UNT head coach and was at Washington State when Mateer first got there. I think that's where the comparison came from. But it was interesting because a lot of John Mateer talk on my show this morning, and obviously John Mateer frequenting the Chick-fil-A here in Norman brings it up, and I'm fired up, man.
I am too.
I am really, really excited just to see what he brings to the table. I cannot wait for spring football again, and I'm. Not that I'm not some newsbreaker or anything on here, but I can assure you that from winter workouts so far, I have heard nothing but similar talk from people on the staff about just the demeanor, the leadership, just the presence that John Mateer has already brought. So I can't wait to see in the springtime, and not just him, but Michael Hawkins. It's been Arbuckle offense and him as the quarterback's coach and what that looks like, but it sure feels like Oklahoma's got a legit bona fide dude at quarterback, and I think everybody is anxious to see what that looks like coming up as soon as possible this spring.
I'll add, it's funny you were talking about just hearing Max Olson tell stories. Does John Mateer a lot of NIL deals that, he's putting the dotting the I's and crossing the T's on. And one of the guys that was helping him out with his Zoom for his car deal, they said when they wrapped up, it's like, you guys need anything else? We good? And that John turned to one of the guys and goes, so I guess you guys hope I'm pretty good, don't you? And just that kind of attitude to where it's you say Baker-esque and you want to be careful, but you like to have a personality. And I heard this term used. In fact, it was your sideline person this year that said it.
Taylor.
Yeah, quarterbackial. You want your person to feel like and seem like the big dog, the quarterback, and maybe, that wasn't necessarily the case at times with Jackson Arnold. But, Dusty, with John Mateer, at least in all the tea leaves and all the things that we're seeing, dude definitely has that quarterback mindset and moxie to him.
That's what, again, that's 100% right. That's what it seems like. I just want to be hesitant to, go too far. But the other reality is kind of somewhat the proof is there. I mean, the guy was statistically one of the best quarterbacks in college football this year. So like there's an element of it that you don't have to go on too big of a limb, and there's definite facts there that support that theory. But yeah, there's no question, man. He quarterback eel is exactly what he seems, and I just just to have it doesn't require, a quarterback position does not require this big bolstery personality, right? I mean, it doesn't require it, but boy, it sure is nice when that's there.
Yeah,
when that's the guy, that's the leader, that's the guy that's going to hold somebody accountable, going to have a little fire in his belly, going to carry himself a little bit different, got a little swag to him, that confidence, that bravado, without being over the line. There's definitely, you can take it too far. But it's hard for me. I've never met John Mateer yet. I haven't had a chance to be around him. But everything I hear, man, he sure seems to check all the boxes. So I'm excited. I know that. I cannot wait. And I also just think that, again, too, like, you need more than one quarterback. I'm just going to continue to harp on that, because how many times this year do you see, throughout the course of the season, somebody go down, somebody have to step in? Even, against Penn State, it was Riley Leonard that went down, and Steve Angeli had to come in and go 6 or 7 on a crucial drive. I do think that, having Arbuckle there from a development standpoint, and having a guy like Mateer there who's going into his 4th year of college football, to help provide, that growth for Michael Hawkins, I think that's important too. So should be a fun room to watch this year. I know that the struggles were real at times last year for a variety of reasons, but it sure seems like there's a lot of reason for optimism, not just for a defense that's got a lot of returning talent, but for what that quarterback might bring to the table as well.
Dusty, how much have you gotten to dig into John Mateer's tape now?
I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I have not started going back and digging into any tape. My season just ended last Wednesday,
Sure.
So I have not dug too much in. I've watched enough to know that the guy is a way better athlete than I ever realized. He can really drive the football down the field, and he knows how to run this offense. So, that I think as we get into springtime, there'll be more opportunity. And not just – I don't think you dive into the Washington State film just to learn about John Mateer. I think you also want to learn about Ben Arbuckle and, what offense, his offense coming to Norman is going to look like, how it feels. You've got 2 years body of work there at Washington State, obviously one with Cam Ward, then a year with John Mateer. But, I think that's, kind of a dual purpose that you can watch that Washington State film and learn a lot about what's coming to Norman, both from a offensive philosophy, play calling style, and then obviously what your quarterback possesses as well.
Well, the big news, of course, Dusty, is that Jim Knowles not coming to Oklahoma. He's inked up with Penn State. What did you make of the way that this unfolded, and what's your reaction to it for OU?
I mean, I'll go back to the first time it was kind of talked about and we mentioned it. Like, I'd always kind of been, I'm going to have to see this to believe it. It sure sounded like last Monday when I was at the national championship, this thing had real teeth, and I think it did. To what extent, I don't know, and I never did know. But, I mean, there were people coming up to me telling me this was going to happen, completely separate from anyone affiliated with Oklahoma, or at least it had a very good chance to happen. And so that was the first time that I was like, oh, man, maybe these rumors are legitimate. I think also when Jim Knowles was asked about it and there wasn't a denial, I think that's everybody's kind of, I mean, I think I even heard Coach Stoops on with Toby kind of acknowledge it in that moment. But it was always something for me. It was like until it actually happened, it was tough to truly know, think that was going to be real. How close was it to happening? I don't know. The fact that Penn State came in, they obviously offered him a boatload of cash, over $3 million for him to take over the defensive coordinator. And I do think that again, how far down the road was it with Oklahoma? I don't know. I do think that there was definite mutual interest of some degree on both sides. I don't think that I feel confident saying that. I'm not here to say that this thing was close to happening and fell apart. I don't know that at all. But it just, my bigger question is like, did something happen at Ohio State? Mm-hmm. Because it's pretty clear that, that Coach Knowles had a wondering eye, right? Like, I mean, it was definitely Oklahoma, Penn State, a little bit of both. And I know Ohio State, I mean, they've got resources, and they definitely wanted to keep him. I don't know if they offered the exact dollar amount Penn State did, but it would – and I'm speculating here. I don't know, but it makes me curious, and it makes me wonder, was there a rub? Was something not quite right, for Coach Knowles? And I know he's a Philly guy, and he's back in the state of Pennsylvania, and maybe Penn State holds a special place in his heart. But, I mean, he had the number 2 scoring defense in 23, the number 1 overall defense scoring in total this past year. It's pretty clear Ohio State is going to provide the resources to, give you what you need. So, like, it just makes me curious. But I think he's a fabulous coach. I've had nothing but great interactions with him, especially when he was the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. Last year I had their bowl game. He was great to deal with last year. He's always been really good to me, and I'm a big fan of Jim Knowles and what he's able to do. I think it would have been a great addition for Oklahoma as much as anything to, allow Coach Venables maybe to take a step away from the defensive side. I don't think it's like some massive loss not getting him. I think it would have been a real benefit if they would have gotten him. Having said that, I think the defense is still going to be good. But I guess my biggest thing is I'm just curious, and I don't know if we'll ever find out the real answer, what was not right at Ohio State? Because that seems, right? You just won a national title. You're at the top of the mountain. Is it another challenge? I am curious what the factors were that led him out of Columbus. And even though it wasn't to Norman, clearly heading to Happy Valley, staying in the conference against a school that, they're not a huge rivalry like Ohio State, Michigan, but Penn State, Ohio State, that's kind of become in its own way within the Big Ten, its own little rivalry. So the whole process, very fascinating. And obviously, I think and this was the other thing, like going back to when y'all first mentioned it, if you go back and you pull the tapes, I was just like, just be careful.
Yeah.
Be careful that as fans, you don't start to fall in love with this before it happens. And then you set yourself up, for this to come to fruition, this to happen. And then when it doesn't, there's this massive feeling of disappointment. You remember me saying that?
Oh yeah. No, I absolutely do.
And that's just, but what they say, shoot your shot, take big cuts and take big swings. And clearly Oklahoma, I think, definitely did that. It did not net them bringing in Jim Knowles, but I don't have like some massive concern that this defense isn't going to still be successful on the field. I definitely do. Now, where do they turn from here? I definitely think we're starting to narrow in on that, but we'll see exactly. I guess my big other thing is with Jim Knowles going to Penn State, not related to Oklahoma, I think that only ups the ante for Penn State in this season. They got both running backs coming back, quarterback coming back, big-time defensive end coming back, and James Franklin's got a top 10 and top 5 team problem in that he has not done a good job beating those teams. And he's got, the players coming back, and now they're all in defensively with Jim Knowles. Like, I think the expectation already high in Happy Valley. I think it's going to be the highest it's ever been in his career. It feels like they're kind of pushing their chips in. They're saying, from a personnel side of things, from a coaching side of things, we're doing whatever we have to do to make this push to get over the hump. And they made it to the semifinal. Plank, I don't have to tell you, there's not many more rungs up the ladder to go. The expectation is for them to be hoisting that trophy at the end of the year. Will Jim Knowles be that piece to get them there? They've been pretty good on defense. I think it's going to be more about Drew Aller, which but clearly the expectation is going to be high, and they are dedicating a ton of resources helping try to ensure that they got a chance to compete for a championship next year at Penn State.
The fallout from Jim Knowles going elsewhere, what's a possibility for the direction that Oklahoma could head, and do you have a direction that you like for OU?
I
mean, the name that was thrown at me, and I'll throw it out there just because I know Toby has mentioned it as well here on the station. Nate Dreiling is a name that seems to be garnering a lot of attention. I don't have a lot to add to that outside of it was a name that was thrown my way, and it's a name that a lot of people, I think, are mentioning at this point. I don't have any experience with him. Looks like a young up-and-coming coach. He's 34. He's from Kansas, much like the head coach is from. He was a great player at Pittsburgh State. I believe he was a national defensive player of the year when he was in college. He was a 4-time first-team All-American at linebacker, so I would imagine he'd be your linebackers coach. He'd be your defensive coordinator. His path to this point, he's been a fast riser as he's gone from an Oregon analyst in 2020, Southeast Missouri State. He was a linebackers coach, run game coordinator. Then he was the coordinator at New Mexico State for 2 years, from 22 to 23. Goes to Utah State as the DC, and then he was named interim head coach, and now on to Arkansas State. So he kind of continues to keep climbing the ladder, if you will. So I mean, it sure seems like a sharp young coach that would probably be similar to what we saw with Zach Alley. I don't know if there's any. I haven't been able to see any connection with Coach V. There's obviously the Kansas ties of where they're from, so I don't know anything outside of that. But my guess would be, it would be a defense that was heavily influenced by the head coach, which I don't think is a bad. I think he's still one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, so I don't think that's a bad thing. That is one of the things with Jim Knowles coming in. I think that you would have really relinquished that power and allowed him to do his own thing, whereas my gut would tell me if you brought in someone like this, if this does happen, or is it Wes Goodwin, who was long time on staff with him at Clemson, it's probably going to be much more influenced by Coach Venables, which, again, I in no way would I ever say that's a bad thing. Obviously, there's a lot that pull him away from that being the head coach. There's so much that you have to account for and have to deal with, though. A lot of head coaches are still coordinators throughout college football. I think that's the biggest difference for me. But if indeed it is Nate Dreiling, all I really know about him, guys, is what I can read. And what you read is really good. But it would tell me that that's going to be a guy that's going to come in and be your linebackers coach, and I think it would just kind of similar to what we've seen. I think it would be a defense heavily influenced by Coach Venables. Again, is he the one that's going to be calling it? I don't know, but I would have to think that in a year with so much importance, he's gonna have a lot of say in what transpires, game planning, calls, all those type of things. And the great thing for any of these coaches on staff, I think the personnel is excellent. So I think that they've, especially up front on that defensive line, think they're going to have a chance to have a really good defense heading into next season, regardless of who's named defensive coordinator. Because to me, if it's not a guy like Jim Knowles, whether it's official or not, the defensive coordinator is Brent Venables.
Yeah,
that's just the way I look at it.
Do you know what? It's kind of wild because just one other thought here on Nate Dreiling. He was put in a tough situation. I still don't know what all went down in the Blake Anderson situation there, Dusty, and I know you don't do a ton. It was weird.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, and so Bronco Mendenhall gets that job out oh gosh, I don't know where Utah State is off the top of my head, but out in the middle of nowhere, Utah. And
Logan, I think.
Logan, yes. Logan, my gosh, Matt Wells would be so mad at me right now. Logan, Utah. And it's wild to me because Bronco Mendenhall went from being, one of the biggest names in coaching when he went from BYU to Virginia and just stepped away for like 3 years.
Yep.
And then he goes to New Mexico and turns it around in 1 year and gets the job at Utah State. It's kind of wild, isn't it, sometimes? Are you seeing guys that maybe get a little burnt out and then they get away from it and they're like, okay, I'm ready to get back in the college ranks?
I mean, Bronco Mendenhall definitely was.
Yeah.
I think he needed a reset. I did one of his games that year in 2021, and you could kind of tell, he was – and I don't know if you've ever had much experience with Coach Mendenhall. He is a fascinating character.
Is he really?
Oh, my gosh. Oh, yeah. He is very fascinating, but he's a really good coach. I mean, his track record at BYU, I mean, he had Virginia in an ACC championship game and playing the Orange Bowl back in 2019. I think that – kind of illustrates what he's capable of. But, yeah, I mean, I think in life, Plank, I mean, everybody sometimes gets a little burnt out, needs a reset, and, good for Bronco. College football is better off with him in it. So I was glad to see when he came back. And, he was at New Mexico previously. Did you know that Bronco Mendenhall was the defensive coordinator for my good friend Brian Urlacher?
Really?
When he was at New Mexico. How about Gary Patterson and Bronco Mendenhall were both coaches of Mr. Urlacher all the way back at New Mexico? How about that?
Wow. That's a pretty good coaching staff right there, man.
Not bad. Not bad. They had him in that back when, they would run like a 3-safety look. He played kind of like that middle field safety way back well before Iowa State was running it and different things. So they were Gary Patterson's pretty good. Bronco Mendenhall is pretty good. I think those guys were a little bit ahead of the curve back in the late 90s when they were at New Mexico.
Not really a question here from the text line, but a comment I want you to react to. Knippelmeyer Chevrolet text line. Sean chimes in. Unpopular opinion. I think OU dodged one, Dusty. I think the $9 million plus we would have committed can be better used elsewhere for a bigger impact over the next 3 years.
Well, I don't look. I think Jim Knowles is great. I don't want to sit here and I think they're fine. To me, this isn't like it would have been great to get him, but I don't think it's like some travesty you didn't. That's the way I view it. Now, what I don't know, can you reallocate if you don't spend that money there, does that mean you can go spend that money on players? Because if it does, I'd rather have the players. If I'm being completely honest. And it's because you still have your head coach, which is so good. And the other part, too, the carryover guys, I think there would have been some kind of transition defensively, whereas now it's not going to be, right? Like the players that have been there and have been playing in the system, there's not going to be anything new. I don't think there's going to be a new learning process. I think there would have been a little bit on some level if you would have brought in Coach Knowles. So I think that aspect, the carryover part of the understanding of the defense and just the way everything fits, I think that's a potential tangible benefit. As far as how, it's that funny part, right? Like that nobody still likes to talk about, like where does the money actually come from? Because that's technically athletic department dollars. But as we get to April 7th and this house settlement is inked, right? And we start to actually go to more of a revenue share model, and some of these contracts and some of this money is strictly coming from the athletic department. Well, then, it's a fair point, and it's a legit question. Is that if you're not spending those resources there, can you spend them elsewhere? But then there's also the cap that comes into play, and you can only spend so much amount. So, I just don't want to mislead people and say, well, since you didn't pay that for a coach, now you can go spend that on players.
Right.
I'll be honest, I don't know exactly how all that works. But did Oklahoma dodge a bullet? I don't know if they dodged a bullet. I do know, though, it would have taken a ton of money to get Jim Knowles because he's earned that. He's no different than when Brent Venables was a D coordinator at Clemson and the lofty salary that he garnered. And with that comes expectations. And there's going to be expectations either way. But I don't know if I agree they dodged a bullet. But I fully get the point. And the way I frame it is, I don't think that this makes Oklahoma any worse, especially on the defensive side. I think they can still be just as good of a defense, even without the addition of Jim Knowles.
Yeah. I guess we're up against it. Dude, great stuff. I cannot wait to chat with you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your, what is it, a Tuesday? And
it's a terrific Tuesday.
It's a terrific Tuesday. A Woo Wednesday tomorrow, Dusty. Can't wait, man. Have a good one.
Thanks, bud.